Medical history is being made this week in New York State.
Over the last 2 weeks, the New York Assembly spent more than 13 hours debating the bill which would make abortion legal for any woman, for any reason, up to the 24th week of pregnancy.
Advocates and enemies of the bill brought tremendous pressures to bear on legislators on the emotional issue.
We're not going to sit quietly any longer. You are murdering us.
The drama was summed up late yesterday when one man's vote made the difference.
Mr. Speaker, I had hoped that this would never come to pass. I fully appreciate that this is the termination of my political career, but what's the use of getting elected or re-elected if you don't stand for something?
Aye, 76, no 73. Those passed.
Blasting you with total abandon and profanity. Very upset. Your floor speech today was a traitorous one. Does a person like you sleep at night? If so, I don't know how.
Many women say they should have recourse to abortions, but this is often impossible since most states won't allow it, and those that do have such stringent medical requirements, few women qualify. Most women who want abortions must go around the law, and 1 million do that in this country every year.
Have you gone through an abortion, Peggy?
Yes, I have.
Why?
I was pregnant and I could not have a child, and I was not willing to go through a pregnancy and then give the child up. I don't think anyone has a right to bring an unwanted child into the world.
My father was always concerned about the underdog, always concerned about people who had less than we did. He was known as a country lawyer. Every so often, people who came to him for help had no money, so they'd pay him in eggs, or they'd bring him a chicken. We always have a moral conscience and a social conscience. And so when he was asked by the Democratic Party in Auburn to run for assembly, this is 1960, he agreed to do it.
Auburn was a highly Republican, highly Catholic small town.
A very slow, even-tempered place. Really, it wasn't very exciting.
When my father won, he was the first Democratic assemblyman from this county since the Civil War. And you know what? He was the last. He had strong beliefs that a person in his position as an assemblyman owed a lot to his constituency.
He knew how to serve his constituents so that they got what they needed, which is why he was able to get reelected every couple of years by increasingly larger margins. He got reelected 5 times.
You know, every day he was at 2 or 3 events, especially when he was campaigning, clam bakes and banquets. Yeah, there's Michael's with Kennedy.
Sometime this week, the Assembly will take up the abortion measure already passed by the Senate. If the Assembly approves the measure, it will become the most liberal abortion law in the country.
This was a big thing. Keeping in mind that 1970 was before the Supreme Court decision in Roe versus Wade. At that point in time, New York was the second most populous state in the United States, second only to California. It's a large segment of the United States that was affected by that. It was a big deal.
It was the first proposed law anywhere to legalize abortion. In other states, do we eliminate the restriction for rape and incest and things like that, but never do we legalize abortion.
There are many who say that this bill is abortion on demand. I submit that we have abortion on demand in the state of New York right now. Any woman that wants an abortion can get one. If she has $25, she has it done here under the most abominable circumstances. And if she doesn't have the $25, please don't forget that she can abort herself. And regretfully, this is happening more often than you or I like to admit.
This was a bipartisan subject. There was a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans on one side, and there was a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans on the other side.
Catholics and Orthodox Jews have been warned by their religious leaders to avoid any involvement with abortion procedures.
The Vatican has published a letter from Pope Paul's Secretary of State, making it plain that the Roman Catholic Church still regards abortion as nothing more than homicide, even when the mother's life is threatened.
You know, I was 17 when this all came up, so I wasn't old enough to vote yet. I don't think I read the paper. And I remember in religion class, they passed a petition around for us to sign, you know, opposing the law. And I remember that only one other girl and I didn't sign it. I was shocked. I was really shocked that all the boys signed it. And I was taken aback and said, you know, what right do they have to say what women can or can't do, you know, with their lives?
People were talking about it. It was big news. There's no question. But my dad was basically trying to stay out of it because he didn't want to upset anybody. His personal feeling about whether it should be legalized, we never talked about. No girls in the family, except for my sister-in-law.
I didn't talk to him that much about it. You know, I was his daughter-in-law.
However, he was well aware of the fact that his home base was the city of Auburn, which was dominated by a large block of population that was opposed to it, largely because of religious beliefs. We had a thriving law practice here in Auburn, very busy, and obviously one would have to consider that would probably be a negative effect on the practice because a certain number of people might leave as clients.
So he made a promise to the county committee that he would vote against it.
Has somebody thought to mention there are many, many adopted children in this world that have created happiness not only for themselves but for their parents?
In the last 10 years, 367 young women in New York City were known to have died as the result of an abortion or an attempted one, either self-inflicted or performed by an unqualified person and under unsafe circumstances.
All we're asking for is that these abortions be performed by a doctor under proper medical circumstances.
The reason that the state of New York adopted this strict prohibition on abortion was for medical reasons, because of the danger in an abortion in the early years of the 19th century. Now, this fact is no longer true. The medical reason for the law doesn't exist anymore.
Well, when does life begin? Can you
Mr.
answer
Terry,
that question?
for me, life begins at the moment of conception, but I am here as a legislator. I have an obligation to give a hearing and recognition to the fact that that is not the same view of all people under all circumstances.
I've tried to get across and obviously not succeeded completely. Women do not have abortions unless they are compelled to do it by a sort of compulsion that no law you can draw would change.
Could we have saved 367 young women from dying? That is the only question of conscience, in my opinion, that anybody should be concerned with.
I graduated college in '68. I was very involved in social action at the time. Anti-war, peace movement, civil rights. I was doing everything. My dad said, you know, I can't vote for the bill. And I said, I understand, just as long as your vote isn't the one to defeat it. I never dreamed that it would come to the point where that would be, where his vote would be the one that was so critical. This was typical of conversations between young adults and their parents in almost every house in the country, whether it was Vietnam, whether it was civil rights, whether it was equal pay for equal work. Our parents couldn't understand why we weren't happy with the way things were. So what was in our house was emblematic of what's going on all over the country, except my dad was the state assemblyman. And unlike 99.9% of the rest of the country, he could actually do something about it.
When I was a senior in college, I found out there had been several young women in my graduating class who had had abortions. This is back in the 60s. No one talked about it. It was taboo. I was lucky. I didn't have to face that problem, but I could see the look of fear in girls' eyes who did. Finally became something where I had to express my beliefs. I could see a change in him. It kind of opened his eyes. He had no idea it was as serious as it was. And I probably said something like, well, you're probably still going to vote the same way, aren't you?
Mr. Michaels, Mr. Miller, Mr. Murtaugh, Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear the vote. May I have it again?
The bill needed 76 votes to pass, and it got 75.
He had voted opposed. He had voted opposed to the bill. Staffers and aides were in the chamber to see what happened, and when they saw the number of votes switching against it, they said it'll never pass, and they started walking out.
Very often, the most organized groups that do the most lobbying, that make the most noise, are groups that actually don't represent a majority. So very often you have to take quiet conversation with yourself. I know where people stand, but I have to do what I think is right.
You're the only hope we have. You're the only vote we've got.
Then Assemblyman George Michaels, an upstate Democrat who had voted against the bill, asked for the floor.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Michaels.
I ask your indulgence. I had hoped that this would never come to pass. Just before I left for Albany this week, my son Jim, who, as you recall, Mr. Speaker, gave the invocation to this assembly on February 4th, and he said, "Dad, for God's sake, don't let your vote be the vote that defeats this bill." Many people in my district may not only condemn me for what I'm about to do, but, Mr. Speaker, I say to you in all candor, I say this very feelingly to all of you, what's the use of getting elected or re-elected if you don't stand for something? So, Mr. Speaker, I fully appreciate that this is the termination of my political career, but I cannot, in good conscience, stand here and thwart the obvious majority of this House, the members of whom I dearly love and for whom I have a great deal of affection. I'll probably never come back here again to share these things with you. I therefore request you, Mr. Speaker, to change my negative vote to an affirmative vote.
Aye 76, no 73. Just passed.
Suddenly, all hell broke loose.
In New York State today, the Senate passed the long-disputed abortion bill.
One of the nation's most sweeping abortion control bills, making it entirely a decision to be made by a woman and her doctor.
The bill now goes to Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who has said he will sign it.
I was living in Cincinnati at the time, and I'm in the middle of a meeting that evening, and I get this phone call from a station in Long Island telling me what happened. I said, "What?"
The kids were watching Sesame Street when I got a phone call saying, switch stations, Grandpa's on the TV.
The fact that CBS and NBC both had cameras in the legislative chambers showed how groundbreaking it was. I called my mother. She said, "Oh my God, so much is happening. We can't talk." Because the phone was just continually ringing.
Your family was correct in their description of you. However, they were too kind. They left out the adjective dirty, shocked and confused by your recent vote. What a disgusting display of emotion you put on for the benefit of television cameras. That was a slick trick you used. A man who lets his children make his decisions for him cannot be much of a man. All right, that was the K's.
I hope you choke on your chicken soup and matzah.
Oh yeah, there was real trouble. A lot of people were bent on not nominating him for another term, and they succeeded.
The ramifications. He lost. He lost his election. He lost the primary. He lost his election.
This one just says, man, I am glad to see that you will be out of the assembly next year. You never had any business being there. You were voted in by the people of your county and not just your family.
Oh, we talked about it a lot. It had great ramifications on the family. My mother, who had been born and raised in Auburn, felt that the community had turned on her. Those are the letters we got 2 or 3 weeks. Then they stopped writing. But the positive stuff, that never ended.
I remember being in this back bedroom at my grandparents' house when these women of all ages flew from all over the country to this little town in upstate New York to come to his bedside and thank him. I mean, it was incredible.
The most liberal abortion law in the country went into effect yesterday.
Family Planning Information Service, would you hold on, please?
How far is his pregnancy advanced? I'll call you right back, and can you fly right in if I get that kind of referral for you?
Simply a matter of how well New York City, principally the city, of course to some extent the rest of the state, handle this new law here. If they handle it well, I think we'll have repeal throughout the country within 2 years at the most. I'm that optimistic.
That bill became model legislation for other states and became picked up by the highest levels of the court system in this country in Roe versus Wade.
New York State, among others, already have liberalized abortions. Now the rest of the country must follow suit.
Definitely because of Assemblyman Michaels, because if the bill had just sort of roared to approval, it might not have attracted so much attention.
The Supreme Court agreed today to hear arguments on one of the most sensitive issues of the time, the legality of abortion.
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
This was probably the most important point in my life.
This was not his personal passion. So the fact that he really listened to his middle son and his daughter-in-law, who I can only imagine were talking to him in pretty desperate tones, you know, he took it in. He took it in and he did something about it.
He knew what he was doing, and he did it at risk of the fact that he would lose his political position with his vote. Not many people do that anymore.
You know, we've talked about some of the perspectives on leadership. We've started a really great piece of work about, feminist leadership. But now I wanted to move us to start thinking about what I think is most critical, and that is the element of leadership that requires real moral courage. I want today to talk about George Michaels. My concern is that too many of the people who exercise moral courage don't have a legacy because we don't talk about them. If you're looking for a model for doing that, for sticking your neck out, for taking a position of moral courage, Assemblyman George Michaels is right at the top of my list.
It's not on his tombstone, but he always said, the most important thing you can ever say about anyone is he made a difference. And my dad made a difference.
But what's the use of getting elected or re-elected if you don't stand for something?